All right, I have now finished reading the book Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and I am ready to do an official review of the book. As I had already expected, it was really great. I really enjoyed the ending. The ending was unexpected and very enjoyable. You know, stories told in Western literature self-identifies people who talk about and write about Western literature, and that famous type of story, the hero's journey, in which the hero goes away from home and then returns at the end. You know, beginning with Odysseus. You go somewhere, go through some adventures, and then return at the end. So in Project Hail Mary, the hero doesn't literally return to home, to the point of origin, but in a different sense, and in a deeper sense, and in a very human way, and in an emotional way, in a way that fulfills his destiny, his role, his relationship with the world, with other creatures. He returns to who he is. He returns home in a way he does return home. So I won't say too much more about that, about what it is that he returns to at the end, at that final scene that is so moving. I found that very impressive. So for the most part, I will not focus on the narrative or the characters. What I'm more interested in, relatively speaking, and for the sake of brevity, I'll keep the video short, I'll focus, instead of the narrative and characters, I'll focus on the world, Andy Weir's world, the kind of world that he is gesturing towards. And an author's relationship with his or her world has a descriptive component and a normative component. There are certain things that the author describes about that imagined world, a world of science fiction or fantasy, that fictional world that the author has a descriptive relationship with it, talks about the states of affairs and facts about that world, and then how things ought to be, the normative dimension of that relationship, the ways in which he thinks that that world should move towards, the values of that world. So there are both aspects in that relationship between Andy Weir and his world. Before I get into the points that I've written down here, I would like to acknowledge Jeremy Fee, who brought this book to my attention. Thank you, Jeremy. If you're watching this, thank you for your own review. If you don't know about Jeremy's channel, Jeremy Fee, he has a great channel on YouTube. I provide a link to that channel below. Go check it out. All right, so let's begin. Let's begin with the world of Andy Weir. The first point that I have here is about education, and more specifically, education in science and technology. What does it mean for somebody to be educated, scientifically educated, or in general educated? One way to think about it, I think a wrong way, a way that Andy Weir would disagree with, is to say that you are who you are. You have your preferences, your value, your story, your personal story, and then on the side you have this thing called education. If you're a scientist, your personhood is the center, you are who you are, and then that on the side, like the salad dressing that comes on the side, your scientific and technological skills and knowledge is on the side. It's not really entangled with who you are. In the world of Andy Weir, in the world of Project Hail Mary, the image that Andy Weir gives us, scientific training, technological training is a part of who a person is, at least for a scientist. So who the scientist is, a scientist is someone whose relationship with the world is shaped by their scientific training. That sounds a little bit circular, but it just, what I'm expressing is that it's a very intimate way of relating to one's knowledge. Your relationship with reality changes if you're a scientist in that sense of the word. Including friendship, including our relationship with other people. So the main friendship at the heart of this book, there's a friendship between two living beings who belong to different planets, different species. And their friendship is to a large extent over their scientific and technological knowledge and technological skills. And they're mutually impressed by each other. And this is not snobbery. It's not to say we look down on people who don't have that kind of knowledge. It is more about appreciation and being able to see another person because you have a similar, relatable, comparable kind of knowledge. Because you have a comparable kind of knowledge, it allows you to relate to the other side, to the other person, to the other living being, and for the other person to become visible to you, for the other creature to become visible. It's a matter of visibility, not a matter of snobbery. It's a matter of appreciation. Another point I want to make is about different ways of relating to science itself. So depending on the requirements of the situation, depending on the problem at hand, we can have two different relationships with science. One of them is the less fundamental. It's about the use. Let's use this piece of technology to solve a problem and everything is going smoothly. But there are points in time where things are not going smoothly. And on those occasions, what we should do or what we end up doing, whether we want it or not, is we should pause and go to the fundamentals. And in Andy Weir's story, that the character goes to the fundamentals, like, okay, this is not working. Let's go back. Let's re-examine the fundamental relevant concept of science and technology that is relevant here. Let's re-examine them with a fresh perspective. Another important distinction is between two types of reasoning. These two types of reasoning have been referred to by other people as predictive reasoning and diagnostic reasoning. These are just fancy terms. You don't really need to know these terms. Predictive reasoning is about reasoning through to predict the consequences of what you're doing now. So when you're designing a piece of technology for a certain purpose, that purpose, if it is successfully accomplished, means that your prediction is fulfilled. So predictive reasoning is involved in designing something, a piece of equipment. Diagnostic reasoning is when we reason backwards from the consequences to the causes. So something has happened, a piece of equipment has failed, or something that was supposed to be contained was not contained. There was a leak, for example, and then the scientist has to diagnose the causes, to reason back from consequences to the origin of the event. If you're interested in that distinction between the two types of reasoning, predictive reasoning and diagnostic reasoning, the book, The Knowledge Illusion, is a good book for that. The scientific way of thinking about nature also, I think, is relevant here. Astrophage, which is a life form, very central to the narrative, we can say it's a symbol for nature in general. It's a symbolic representation of nature. Nature is not good or bad. Astrophage is not purely good or bad. It would be bad if we cannot control it. What is bad is not a substance or a life form. What is bad is our inability to control and be able to predict natural processes. To be able to, if we fail to coordinate with natural processes, that is bad. But we cannot point to any natural process and say that's a bad thing. We should eliminate that. Life in general. Okay, this is to me, this was an extremely important point about Andy Weir's attitude towards life. In fact, I think he went out of his way to ensure we all know that the main character, the main protagonist of the story, doesn't have a death wish. He doesn't want to have a sacrificial fate. He doesn't want to sacrifice himself, and he doesn't celebrate sacrifice for its own sake. I'm looking for an excuse to end my life to save other people, save the world. No, he loves life. He loves to be alive, and that way of engaging with problem solving, with science, with technology, with knowledge, with culture, with relationships, all those are parts of a big celebration of life, the value of being alive. So that attitude towards life, that life is a good thing, that we shouldn't pursue sacrifice for sacrifice's sake, that should be the background as we face the decisions of the protagonists. So when the protagonist decides to make a sacrificial move, to do something that is not so self-serving, that doesn't that puts himself, his own life at risk, that doesn't mean that he has a death wish. Andy Weir, I believe, is quite clear on that. Okay, I have two relatively critical points that I want to end the video with. The first point is about culture. So Andy Weir, the way he writes, in his mind, he assumes a total separation, clear and total separation between the two cultures, science on the one hand, science and technology, and other parts of culture. In fact, there is a scene in the book in which he talks about culture as the C word. So the use of culture in the sense that a behavior doesn't make sense and it's difficult to understand. Maybe it's a little bit discomforting for other people who don't belong to that culture. And you can immediately evoke the concept culture to have other people accept what you're doing. So what I'm doing seems weird to you, but you must accept it because it's my culture. So he's critical of that, but he doesn't get into it deeply enough. So I hope that in future works by Weir, we read a little bit more about conflict between cultures and maybe how that could be solved using these types of reasoning that he's a proponent of. Reasoning our way in the context of a cultural conflict. He explicitly says that so far between these two creatures, between the two main protagonists, there wasn't a cultural conflict. There wasn't a direct conflict between their culture. And that was fortunate for this story, but it could be in future works. The final point is about language. So we have two characters from different planets, different life forms, and they managed to cross the language barrier. And that was a little bit hand-wavy. It was too easy to be true. I mean, there were certain concepts that I don't think could be translated that easily from English to that alien tonal language. So, and the way Weir dealt with that was he fast-forwarded. He said, okay, after a while, we managed to agree upon the meaning, a translation of about 2,000 words. And I was like, wow, I would love to know a little bit more detail about how you imagine that could work. Because I don't think it's as straightforward as that. Just going from the numbers first, okay, this is 1, this is 2, and then sarcasm, a concept of sarcasm suddenly is understood by both sides. Or stupid, things like that, or intelligence. But in general, the book is great. The book was a really good experience. And I think in a couple of years, I might read it again, and maybe even review it once more. I would recommend it to you if you're interested in that kind of meditation. That's it. It was a meditation on life, on science and technology, and on friendship. That's a good summary of the book. In addition to being a very entertaining story, it's also a meditation on those themes: friendship, science and technology, education, and life in general. All right, thank you if you have watched up to this point, and I would love to hear what you think about the book if you have read it. Otherwise, I will speak with you in future videos.